Thank you for joining us at Community on Demand. Today, Pastor Dan concludes his 7-part series called Celebrate Jesus to show how each of the 7 Jewish holidays point to the Messiah. So many people in our American culture seem to be either anxious, apathetic, or downright angry. However, as American Christians, we should be thankful, fulfilled, and joyful. In Leviticus chapter 23, Moses was told to institute a national Jewish holiday known as the Feast of Tabernacles. This holiday was a 7-day celebration with lots of food, fun, and fellowship. Even though this holiday was Jewish specific, there are some truths for us and an important prophetic event that most people are not aware of. This message was recorded during a live Sunday morning service at Community. Let's listen in as Dan begins.
Nestled in the valley underneath the cliffs of Forbidden Valley in the West Texas Davis Mountains is the Buffalo Trail Scout Ranch Camp. And every summer, hundreds of campers and adult leaders will go there where they will spend a week in the rugged outdoors. There will be, when they arrive, they'll make camp, they'll sleep in tents, they will hike mountain trails, ride horses, take a dip in the cool Olympic-side pool. They'll learn skills, they'll discover nature for a week. Some of them will forget to take a bath the whole week. Deliberately. Even though there will be adventure to experience, campers will lack the conveniences of home, such as television, home-cooked meals, air conditioning. And, unfortunately, there will be a few things that go wrong. There will be a few mishaps and minor injuries and insect bites, and there will even be disagreements among the campers. But most campers will enjoy the week, and by week's end, they will be tired and thirsty and hungry and dirty, and they'll be ready to go home. However, there will be those campers who were miserable the entire week. They will not enjoy the great outdoors. They will not participate in the activities. In fact, what they will do is they will withdraw. They will whine and gripe and complain about everything and everybody, and they will miss the whole experience. They just don't get it. Camping is rugged. It's tough. There are going to be some things that will go wrong. Everything will not go right. What they don't realize is soon the camp out will be over and they can't go back and relive it. It's over. And they've missed the enjoyment of it. Sometimes I feel like that discontented camper that's off to himself. I forget that this life that I am living right now is temporary, like a camp out. I forget that. Sometimes I forget that I will soon be going home to my heavenly home, and all my stuff that I've got, and I've got a lot of stuff, so does my wife, we both have a lot of stuff, will all be folded up like a tent, stored away somewhere, given away. Who knows what will happen to it. And we'll be gone. Yet, when I tend to get like this, like the sniveling little kid over in the corner, I tend to whine and gripe and complain, and I just really don't enjoy the camp out. Have you ever feel like that? Where are all the conveniences? As believers, we are all on a camping trip here on planet Earth. Now, fortunately, as American Christians, Our camp out is not so rugged. In fact, we metaphorically are camping out in Airbnbs, motels, hotels, travel trailers, nice motorhomes. That's compared to the rest of the world. That's what our camp out is like here upon this earth. But sometimes we forget. We forget as Christians that life is temporary, like a camp out. We forget that we'll be soon headed home, as we've been singing about and talking about, to our heavenly home. And when this happens, this is when we find ourselves becoming discontent, whiny, gripey, complainy. That's when we end up doing that. I find it very interesting that in the very first books of Moses, that most of the Bible characters lived in tents. Have you ever noticed that? Abraham lived in a tent. Moses lived in a tent. Even God lived in a tent. Have you ever thought about that? Maybe they're trying to tell us something there. During the founding of the nation of Israel on Mount Sinai, God told Moses to institute 7 national holidays. Have y'all learned that since we've been talking over the last 7 weeks? And the seventh one that he told Moses to institute was one that was called the Feast of Tents or Tabernacles. Let me read from Leviticus chapter 23, verse 33. You can turn there and read with me, or read on the screen here. It says, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, The 15th day of the 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacle for 7 days to the Lord." This holiday was a 7-day camp out. And they were to celebrate rather than complain on this camp out. Look down at verse 41 there. "You shall keep it as a feast to the Lord for 7 days in the year. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. You shall celebrate in the 7th month. You shall dwell in booths for 7 days. All who are native Israelites shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." He talked about celebrating a holiday of tabernacles in tents. For 7 days, they were to celebrate in tents. And this celebration was a time of fellowship, a time of feasting, and then a time to finish everything up, wrap everything up. And so let's kind of dig in and look at the feast. I don't know if you know very much about the Feast of Tabernacles. We're going to dig into it today. But first of all, it was a time of fellowship. Look in verse 35. It says, "On the first day, there should be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it." It says a holy convocation. We've talked about this before. The convocation would be an assembly or a gathering of the people. And it talks about this one being holy, meaning that they're set apart on the first day of the 7-day celebration, a holy gathering. So it's obviously, so where do they gather? Obviously on the tabernacle grounds. That would make sense to me. A holy gathering. Well, what would they do? Well, I think they would make connections. They would fellowship with each other. They would get instructions. They would get ready for the celebration. And they may even have a few worship songs like we did today and some teaching. It was time to do that. By the way, can I put a plug in here? That's what we do when we gather together. It is a time for edification, building one another up. Because some of us walk in those doors and we feel like, man, this is it. I can't take it anymore. We need to be encouraged. We need fellowship. We need worship. We need encouragement. We need the Word of God that will get us through the next 7 days. And so it was a time for fellowship. Secondly, it was a time to feast. This is really interesting. In verse 36, it says, "For 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. And you shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of the beautiful trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. See what they did here? They made booths or tents or lean-tos, as we call them over here in Texas, with tree branches. And for 7 days, they camped out in these booths or tents, and they brought offerings. Did you see this? Of fruit. And they also brought flour for feasting and rejoicing throughout the entire holiday. In fact, hold your place right there. There's a better description of what they actually did during this holiday in Numbers chapter 29. So hold your place there. Let's look at Numbers chapter 29. And I'm not going to read all of the whole chapter, but just let's pick it up in verse number 12. It says, on the 15th day of the 7th month, you shall present a burnt offering, an offering made by fire, as a sweet aroma to the Lord. Now, this is where it gets interesting. 13 young bulls, 2 rams, 14 lambs in their first year. They shall be without blemish. Their grain offerings shall be of fine flour mixed with oil, 3/10 of an ephah for each of the 13 bulls, 2/10 for each of the 2 rams, 1/10 for each of the 14th lambs, also 1 kid of the goat as a sin offering beside the regular burnt offerings, its grain offerings, and drink offerings. Now, if you took the time to read that entire chapter and you got your adding machine out and begin to calculate what is going on here, you would come up with a total of 71 bulls, 15 rams, 99 lambs, 8 goats, and dozens of bushels of bread dough mixed in oil and something to drink. What does that sound like to you? Like to me, a Texas barbecue. A big Texas barbecue. Let me switch over to Deuteronomy chapter 16. Talking about the same feast. You shall observe the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days, when you have gathered from your threshing floor and from your winepress, and you shall rejoice in your feast. Aha! We are going to eat. We don't kill them and throw them away. We're going to eat, okay? You and your son and your daughter, your male servant and your female servants, and the Levite, the stranger and the fatherless and the widow who are within your gates. It's a time of feasting, a time of partying. Today, Israelites, this is their favorite holiday, by the way. It would be mine, This is their favorite holiday. They make booths and tents, and in some of the tents, they're pretty elaborate with curtains and stuff. And they will put dining rooms, very nice dining sets inside those tents, and a place over in the side with sleeping bags. And sometimes they'll sleep out there. And this is where they'll go and eat. And they'll invite their friends to eat. And some of the things that they'll bring in, if you do a little research on this, in that dining room, and they will prepare the feast with apples and carrots and potatoes and squash and avocados, and obviously lots of meat, bread, and drink. It's a time of feasting, a celebration, a time to rejoice. So as they're getting ready for this, it's a time for fellowship, it's a time for feasting, but then it's also a time to finish, to wrap things up. Let's go back to Leviticus 23 and verse 36. On the 8th day, I thought there were 7 days. Well, there's one more after the 7 days. On the 8th day, you shall have a holy convocation. You shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. It is a sacred assembly, and you shall do no customary work on it. At the end of the holiday camp out, on the 8th day, they were to gather back on the tabernacle grounds and conclude the holiday and head back to their homes. For most Jewish people, like I said a moment ago, this is their favorite holiday. This year, the Feast of Tabernacles was celebrated from Sunday, October the 9th, just a few weeks ago, through Sunday, October the 16th. And it was celebrated to commemorate the Exodus. We read that at the beginning, when God and Israel journeyed through the wilderness for over a 40-year camp out. Well, when I look at this camp out, I always want to think, well, how does that apply to me? But obviously, we didn't do this a month ago. This is a Jewish-specific holiday. It's for God to have the Jewish people to commemorate the Exodus when they were all in tents for 40 days. But I think it sends a strong signal to us that God desires to dwell, or may I say camp out, with us. But like that shriveling little kid back at the camp, we tend to gripe, whine, complain, and push back at God and resist Him as He tries to move in close to us. This 7-day holiday reminds me of 7 campouts down through human history where God made an attempt to come and camp out with His people, but they just pushed back at Him, and it ended in disaster. I want to give you a list of those 7 periods of time. We call them dispensations, cut out of times. I like calling them campouts. In fact, I like calling them camps. And so if you want to take a note of them, we've got a little thing there in your bulletin. You can list them. Camp number 1, I call Camp Innocence. Let me read to you from Genesis chapter 3 and verse number 8. And they, that would be Adam and Eve, heard the sound of the Lord walking in the garden in the cool of the day. You know, in the Garden of Eden, God just wanted fellowship with Adam and Eve. And one of the ways He fellowshiped with them is to walk in the garden with them in the cool of the evening. And while God wanted to walk with them, what were they doing? They wanted to talk with Satan, and it ended in a disaster. I mean, sin entered into the world at that time. They left the Garden of Eden, paradise, and life became disastrous. That's camp number 1. Camp number 2, I call Camp Conscience. This is after the fall of man. After he begot Methuselah, that would after he begot Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years. I call this Camp Conscience because God gave us a free will, free moral agency. He allows us to do what we want to do. He doesn't make us like robots. He didn't do that. And so while some chose to walk with God, like Enoch and Methuselah and Seth and others and Noah down the line, some chose to push back away from God, and they chose violence and evil and sexual immorality, which resulted in the flood. And Genesis 5-11, it says, the wickedness of man was great in the earth, that every intent of the thoughts of his hearts was only evil continually, and the earth was filled with violence. God wanted to camp out with us, but we pushed back at Him. Camp number 3, I call it Camp Justice. This is after the flood. Before the flood, it says Noah walked with God. So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply after the flood and fill the earth. After the flood, God told Noah, have children, lots of children. Fill the earth and execute justice. God promised that there'd never be another global flood. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go there. Okay. Noah instituted the first court of justice of human experience. However, from that time, tyrants like Nimrod rejected God, corrupted government, perverted justice, which resulted in idolatry, immorality, homicide, confusion, and tyranny. The earth was a mess. But God still wants to dwell with us. And so let's go to camp number 4. I call this Camp Promise. Then the Lord appeared to Abram, who's later called Abraham, and said, to your descendants I will give this land. Here on several occasions, God literally appeared to Abraham. He gave him the land, gave him the deed to the promised land, talked to him, promised him that he would bless the whole world through him. And Abraham believed. And he would bless the world through his descendants. But you know what his descendants did? His descendants left the land. They went to Egypt. It was a disaster. They ended up in slavery for over 400 years. Slave nation. Camp number 5. I call that Camp Israel. Some would call it Camp Moses. I call it Camp Israel. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, let them make me a sanctuary, a tent, that I may dwell among them. See, we have it again. God has the desire to be with us, to dwell with us. And here we actually see the world's largest and longest camp out. I mean, if you start calculating those Israelites, I think there were probably about 3 million of them, or at least 600,000 soldiers alone. Give them all a wife and a couple of kids, and there you do the math, you see. And they stayed on this one for 40 years, and God literally dwelt among them in the tabernacle, led them. But after Israel entered the land, he led them to the land. After Israel entered the land, what did they do? They pushed back at God. And when God appeared in the flesh, in human form, as Jesus Christ, what did they do? They rejected him. They argued with him. And then they crucified him. They pushed back. And then Camp 6. I call that Camp Grace. That's our camp out with God. That's where we are. The Apostle Paul said in Ephesians chapter 3 and verse number 2, indeed you have heard of the dispensation of grace, the grace of God, which was given to me for you. This is us today. And he has done something marvelous. He's not camping in a tent. He's camping in our tabernacle, our tent. Don't you know that the Holy Spirit, for you that know Christ as your Savior, the Holy Spirit lives within you, dwells within you. And this camp has been going on now for 2,000 years. God has been dwelling with us, in us, at Camp Grace. But you know what? This camp out is about to end. We're down at the end. We see it on the horizon, and it will turn out disastrous for those that have pushed away from him. In fact, I want to read to you from one of the prophets, Zechariah. Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 15 describes an event that will happen at the end of the tribulation period. We talk about that. You guys know that we will, when we're raptured, that there will be a 7-year period. At the end of that period will end this age. And here's what Zechariah says. He says, behold, the day of the Lord is coming, and your spoil will be divided in your midst. He's talking to Israel here. For I will gather all nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, and the women ravaged. Half of the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle. And in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives will be split into from the east and the west, a very large valley. Half of the mountains shall move to the north, half shall move toward the south. Then you shall flee through my mountain valley. Thus the Lord my God will come, and all the saints with you. Zechariah 14:1. Like I said, this camp out is almost over. But there's still one more camp out. This is not the last one. There's one more. And I call it Camp Kingdom. Zechariah 14:16 describes it. And it shall be, and it shall come to pass, that everyone who is left of all the nations which come against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, to keep the Feast of Tabernacles during the millennial kingdom. This will be the greatest camp out of all. It'll last for 1,000 years, where each year during the Feast of Tabernacles, all nations will send representatives to Jerusalem to worship the King and to celebrate Jesus, like we sang in the song a moment ago. The 7 days of the Feast of Tabernacle seem to reflect these 7 periods of time, ending with that final camp out where nations will be able to celebrate Jesus in Jerusalem. But you know what? Even then, people on earth will push back at the King of Kings who is reigning in Israel, because you know the end of the story that in the book of Revelation, where Satan will be released for a season, gather up the armies of the earth for one last battle. In October of 2010, Christian author Joel Rosenberg wrote a Christian thriller entitled The 12th Imam. If you've not read that, it's a must-read. The book begins with the 1979 takeover of the American embassy there in Tehran, Iran, and kind of goes through some of the things that were happening in the city. And then the story jumps to 2001, and it starts with a camp out. You see, there's a teenage boy by the name of David and a friend that he's going to meet on this camp out by the name of Marcelli. Both of their fathers had worked in the CIA and were involved in Iran many years earlier, but their fathers have been planning a reunion at a camping trip in the wilderness of Canada. In fact, it is so remote that you can't get to it any other way except for a float plane. And so these fathers and their teenage children, and there's another teen and some other colleagues, they gather up and they fly down to this remote island in Canada where the fishing is just spectacular. And the plane lands, drops them off, they unload, and they make camp. Of course, they've got a little shack that they're going to stay in. The plane flies off. And the fishing is great. I mean, this is a wonderful camping trip. I mean, there's fishing and hiking and adventure, a little romance that happens. Now you're going to read the book. Just a lot of cool stuff that happens. And it's for a 4-day weekend. And on Monday, that's the last day. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And so on Tuesday, everybody breaks camp. They get their backpacks, roll everything up, all their gear, and they go out to the dock for the float plane to come back. And they wait. It's supposed to arrive at 10 o'clock, but it doesn't show. Well, maybe they're just late. And they wait, and they wait, and they get frustrated. One of the guys is a doctor. He says, man, they need to get here because I've got a patient. I've got to see an operation, heart surgery on Thursday. They got to get here. They begin to panic a little bit. Nightfall comes. They go back to their cabin. On the next day, they come out. On Wednesday, same thing. On Thursday, they go back out to the dock. No plane. They begin to run out of supplies. They're tired of eating the fish that they've caught. That's all they've been eating now, and they're getting worried. And on Thursday, the plane doesn't show, and they're wondering what's going on. No communication, no cell towers. What's going on? And on Friday, David, the young teenage boy, is laying in his bed, just wondering what it's going to be like when he hears overhead the sound of the float plane. The plane's coming. He jumps up, he rolls his gear together and runs out to the dock. The rest of them are already there. And when the plane pulls up, the pilots jump out. They run down the dock and they're apologizing. They said, we're so sorry, let us explain. And of course, everyone's ready to kill them, because they've missed all of their stuff. And one pilot says, we were loaded up. We were ready to head your way. But then we're on the tarmac and ready to take off, and then we get a message that all aircraft had just been grounded. We got the news that 4 commercial airlines had been hijacked. 2 of them flew into the World Trade Centers. 1 in the Pentagon. 1 had been down in Pennsylvania. F-16s and 18s were flying the skies over Canada and the United States. And any aircraft that took off was under the threat of being shot down. We couldn't leave. And we just were able to come. So we'll give you your money back, $750 a person. We'll give you money back. Marcelie said, you said they ran into the World Trade Centers? And they said, yes. And she said, were there any survivors? And one of the pilots said, you got to be kidding. The towers collapsed. Well, no survivors? He said, they think that over 3,000 people perished in those towers. Marcelie sunk down and began to cry uncontrollably, and everyone looked in shock because her mom was a banker in one of the towers. Her life would never be the same. You see, the whole time they were on the camp-out trip, they were not aware of the evil, the battle, the things that were going on. They were just on the camp-out, worried about having fun and the inconveniences of not having all the comforts of home, and really not understanding the devastation of the world and the things that were going on. Today, we are on a camp out. The Apostle Paul calls it the dispensation of grace. On this camp out, we have adventure, leisure, tension, politics, romance. We think this camp out will never, ever end. But one day soon, it will not be the sound of a float plane that we hear. It will be the sound of a trumpet. And that's when the camp out will be over. It will be at that time. Lastly, following the rapture, the glorious return of the kingdom of Christ and his kingdom, it will be time to go home. Let me read Revelation 21, and then we'll pray. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. He will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them and their God, and God will wipe away tears and every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. The end. Eternity begins. I think, I'm not trying to be a downer, but I just think that sometimes we lose perspective. We put everything we have into this life, and it's just going to be folded up, and it's going to be over, and eternity will begin.
On behalf of Pastor Dan and the folks at Community, thank you for joining us today at Community on Demand. Feel free to share this link with others, and please know you are always welcome to be our guest during a live service any Sunday morning at our campus in the Woodlands, Texas. For more information, just click on the link www.cbcwoodlands.org. I hope you will again join us at Community on Demand.